So it is now my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, David Yarnold. I've actually known David since 2005 while I was working at the Environmental Defense Fund, and David came on board as executive director. I counted David then, as I do now, as a friend, but more importantly, as a mentor. David has such a keen sense of what makes organizations tick and what makes people tick. Combine that with a strong commitment to environmental stewardship, and you have a very effective environmental leader of consequence. In 2010, David left the Environmental Defense Fund. He was probably following me, but it took him 3 years to figure it out, but to become Chief Executive Officer and President of the National Audubon Society. Now, that's got to be a pretty big challenge. It was incorporated in 1905. It's one of the oldest environmental nonprofits in the world. And with over 500 locations, chapters, and I gather hundreds of thousands of members, it's obviously a huge operation. Under David's leadership, the organization has completed a new strategic plan, which I invite you to go to the website and read. It's entitled Roadmap for Hemispheric Conservation, that establishes a robust national policy and the first set of shared conservation goals for its national network in 20 years. Significant features of the plan include aligning its conservation work along migratory pathways or flyways, pursuing environmentally friendly siting for renewable energy, and advancing a new movement called Conservation Has No Party, which I think we can all endorse. As David says of the organization today, it's not your grandmother's Audubon anymore, and she'd be proud of us. David received a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1976 from San Jose State University and had a stellar career. Did I hear someone clapping for San Jose? Yeah, I could get with San Jose. There's a song, I think, right? Yeah. Okay, no, I'm not going to sing it. Okay. And actually, before joining EDF, had a stellar career as a journalist. Over a span of 26 years, he was an editor of the San Diego Mercury. That's a little airplane with a little thing behind it that says, "Go David, go David." Okay. Where he won a Pulitzer Prize and was the first newspaper executive to run an online division. We are honored to have David address us and inspire our graduates today. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce David Yarnold.
Good morning. What an honor this is. Thank you for the invitation to speak. AC, you rock. And congratulations to all of you. So this is what you really want to know. Yes, I look forward to the day that Audubon can point to a long list of employees who are Nicholas School graduates. So I won't talk with you today about catastrophic climate-induced hypersalinity of the oceans, nor will I take a point of view about the role of switchgrass as a renewable power source. I have to believe you've covered those topics a time or two. I'm here today as the unlikeliest CEO of a major environmental nonprofit in America. I'm not a scientist. I'm a recovering journalist. I wasn't even a birder until 3 years ago. And I won't lie, my humanities background has caused me some painfully humbling moments. When I first came to Environmental Defense Fund in 2005, I was sitting through some interminable, impenetrable meeting when I caught the phrase, bovine methane emission loads. And 45 minutes into this meeting, I think I blurted out, "Are we talking about cow farts?" And to my relief, someone said gravely, "No, we're talking about cow belching." How did I get in that room? But my unlikely background does qualify me to share a personal message with you. It's a celebration of risk. I recognize that may be counterintuitive in the wake of the financial collapse of 2009 and a super tight job market. I think those pressures make talking about risk even more important. So here's the starting point of my message. Tip 1, risk is good and it is not a luxury and you should embrace it. The choices we make determine how we influence the biosphere, the web of life, and the human issues that are both the source and the solutions for our problems. So this is really a question of ambition and reach and our willingness to fail. Embracing risk also matters because America's environmental movement needs a massive dose of change and bolder advocacy, and you are the best hope for that future. People and organizations pay a lot of lip service to risk, but mostly we embrace certainty. So think about risk as an extension of the scientific method. The foundation of the scientific method is that it encourages constant challenge. Few ideas get better in a vacuum, we all know that. And while data and facts are at the heart of what we do and how we govern our decision making, please embrace intuition and scare the bejesus out of yourself professionally every couple of years. As environmental professionals, you've been trained to analyze and interpret scientific information to solve environmental problems and manage natural resources. We're in the business of eliminating variables to solve environmental problems. Risk is about embracing variables. And nothing says that more clearly than graduation. So this is probably the right time to reassure you, whether you're parents who paid for these educations or whether you financed them yourselves through loans, yes, there are real jobs out there and you're well prepared for them. Take a deep breath, it's gonna be okay. Tip 2, take lots of risks and don't be afraid to stand out. I did. I was the only editor of one of America's 100 largest newspapers from a graphics and photojournalism background. At our editors' conventions, it was like being from the wrong side of the tracks. So for me at least, risk isn't an idea. It's not a concept. It's not a theme. It really has been a guiding principle, and I believe it's a career choice that has made my life a lot more fulfilling. So here's my story, just to establish my creds. I've worked since I was 15. My parents never took me on a college visit. I put myself through a state school by taking lion cubs and harpy eagles and gob-hawking llamas on school visits as an educator for a wild animal park. I didn't even attend my own graduation because I was already job hunting. I went to work for a new regime at the San Jose Mercury News, and we became the first newspaper to publish online. At 32, I was an assistant managing editor and one of the senior members of our leadership team. At that point, I stepped down the organizational ladder and off the management track. I designed and completed a 2-year-long cross-training program to demonstrate that I had the skills to manage beyond my area of expertise. There was no path out at the beginning. There was no exit. I just had the faith that one would appear if I took the chance. And it did. I ultimately became executive editor and publisher of 2 newspapers. And after taking that road truly less traveled, all the way to the top, after 27 years and a staff Pulitzer Prize, I said goodbye to a journalism career in 2005. I went to the Environmental Defense Fund because Fred Krupp had the vision to hire someone who could make the trains run on time and allegedly communicate. And I again found myself an outlier, the only person serving as executive director of a green group who came from a communications background. I was second in command of an organization of scientists and lawyers and policy wonks, and with a background in none of those disciplines. That felt risky. I started at the same time as Bill said, and he was clearly the more talented of the two of us. It was pretty terrifying, except for the Bill part, but what I got in return was an opportunity to change the world. So tip 3, don't waste opportunities because you fear risk. I saw that when I worked at Knight Ridder in the mid-90s. At the time, it was arguably the most prestigious newspaper company in America. We owned the Charlotte Observer, Philadelphia Inquirer, the Detroit Free Press, Miami Herald, etc. And I was the first VP of content for a newspaper company as we established ourselves on the digital frontier. I saw powerful examples of how people resist change. I still remember going to those newsrooms and telling those journalists, wow, you're going to be able to publish all day. You're going to be able to publish as many times as you want. And they said, that's the door. We like publishing once. And when I was at Knight Ridder Digital, there was a Stanford grad on the other side of the wall. I ran content, he ran advertising. This story actually is not well known. He went to the classified ad directors of all of the Knight Ridder newspapers. This was 1995. And he said all of that text, all of those cars for sale and jobs and houses, that stuff's perfect for the interweb. It's really perfect. And the classified ad director said the same thing to him that the newspaper editor said to me, that's the door. And so Jeff Skoll went off and co-founded eBay and did it anyway. That's what happens when you shun creative destruction. So, having grown up in Silicon Valley, I really believe that failure isn't a cause for shame. It's just an opportunity to learn. You can hear that as a platitude if you want, but I drank all of the Silicon Valley Kool-Aid. I wrote those stories. I know it's the truth. So here are a couple of things that I know about human spirit and risk, and because I'm a commencement speaker, I get to share those. Number one, we are resilient enough to absorb failure. Number two, well, I really hate to sound like a parent of two, which I am, but I don't think I've ever been the smartest or the most gifted anywhere I've worked. But I've never said no to a challenge, and the value of perseverance is greatly underestimated. Three, listening mitigates risk. At Audubon, my first task was to find a vision. So I hit the road for a month, and I learned about the flyways of the Americas, the superhighways in the sky that describe how birds migrate, where they live, and the habitat they need. I just listened. I just reported that story. So this item is actually my wife's idea. She taught science writing at UC Santa Cruz and is by far the most talented journalist in my household. And she patiently sat through a draft of these remarks Friday morning, and she said, having taught bright young scientists for several years, she said, this is her advice, tell them to be humble enough to listen. So I could go on with a much longer list, but instead I'll refer you to a blog site that a brilliant photographer friend of mine turned me on to. It's called inoveryourhead.net. And I make no endorsement of its violations of the FCC's 7-word rule, but I will tell you that it's sensational life advice. So here's just a little taste of some of those tips, 100 tips for life. Going into the unknown is how you expand the known. There is a method that works. Find it. Read more, especially things you disagree with. Get one big success early in life. It'll help you build your confidence for later on. So check out that site. I wish I'd known about it 30 years ago. So that leads me to my next point. Tip 4, big risks are more worthwhile than little risks. Now, you've heard this before, the cliche, go big or go home, but it's really true. Little change often takes as much energy as big change. So make the big changes that matter. Go for those. I remember a panel that had 3 editors who became publishers at a conference I was at. And these guys were all my heroes. They were all Pulitzer winners. They were the smartest editors I knew. And they were asked what they would have done differently in their first year as publishers. And you'll hear this from other CEOs as well. They all said, I would have been bolder and more decisive in my first year. I was shocked. So it's one of life's paradoxes. It's really important to do the little things all the time, to say thanks more often, to listen when a kid wants to tell you something, to show a little gratitude. But when it comes to your professional decisions, be really bold and opportunistic. So we're doing that at Audubon. We're using data and technology to drive large-scale conservation across the hemisphere. Thanks to our partners at Esri, I know that may not mean a lot to some of you without the dresses on, But thanks to our partners at Esri, we're going to make GIS mapping seats available to every one of our 470 chapters and all of our international partners who want those capabilities. You know as I do that one of the truths about conservation is that game-changing maps matter. By democratizing data, putting mapping technology into the hands of community activists, Audubon can turn its grassroots into informed, formidable forces for good. Tip 5, our planet is at risk and the solutions are unimaginable. Somebody should take note of the milestone that we passed yesterday when Mauna Loa for the first time recorded 400 parts per million. A sad day, a day we knew was coming, but a day that just seems shocking to actually see. So this is your burden. You're going to come up with solutions that drive not just environmental change, but help create a more sustainable and equitable climate future. But we can't wait for certainty because in this case, the risks are too great. I had a conversation recently with a senior executive at a major, let's say, chemical kind of company, and he said, you know, I'm almost at that point. I'm 90% of the way there with you on climate change. I kind of believe that. I'm 90%. And I said, if a doctor told you that you had a 90% chance of falling dead from a heart attack or a 90% chance of contracting type 1 diabetes, would you do something about it? He said, of course. I said, then do it. So you... So you're going to have an unimaginable impact. No, this isn't another one of those commencement platitudes about unimaginable impacts. It really is unimaginable. The thing about the future is that it's the future. The mistake most people make when they try to project solutions is that they're projecting them from what's known currently. I have great faith, having told the story of Silicon Valley for 27 years and having worked at places like EDF and Audubon, I have great faith that the solutions to these absolutely horrific challenges haven't been invented yet, and I believe they will be. And in addition to that, we now have the opportunity to take advantage of disruptive social movements as well, and I would encourage everybody to do that, and I'll come back to that. Tip 6, there's just one more after this. The risks you take will have tangible rewards. You know, back in the day, there were few careers in environmentalism or conservation, but the world has changed, you know that, or you wouldn't have made the excellent choice to be in this program. These are still early days, though. Most of the sustainability heads at America's Fortune 500s weren't trained in environmental sciences. Most were marketing or operations staffers. 10 years ago, those corporations weren't producing sustainability reports, and they didn't employ scientists to make those possible. And even the greatest green companies still haven't fully integrated sustainability. In too many places, it's still an add-on, and you know that. So here's a true story. I was talking to a very senior person at one of Silicon Valley's largest companies, and they wanted to make their pledge at the Clinton Global Initiative, and they wanted to reduce their emissions. And he said, but the problem is we don't know what our emissions are. And I said, hang on a second. And I came back and I said, it's 260,000 tons a year at all of your global facilities. And there was this long silence. And he said, how'd you know that? And I said, it's in your sustainability report, read it. Environmental science is one of the fastest growing fields in the world, and the pace of growth will only accelerate as mitigation, adaptation, and legislation moves front and center locally, nationally, and globally. But you know, your career isn't going to be delivered with instructions in 20 languages and handy diagrams. I know you know that. You don't get to start as the CEO. You probably wouldn't want to. You may not even start in the job that you really want. You must make mistakes. I know right now you just willingly would make that first mistake. I get that. For 3 months, I was the world's worst PR person. And I moved to LA from San Francisco for a job and then back. I was the first customer for an online mapping company. An online mapping company. Seems like a good idea. So the problem is that it took maps so long to load at 28K dial-up that they were useless, and they weren't portable. So it was a disaster. But by the way, the guy who started that company called Zip2 and crashed it, that was Elon Musk, who went on to co-found PayPal, SpaceX, and Tesla. So you get to build your career just like your dean, Bill Shamides, who is by training an atmospheric scientist, but who's also taken a spin or two through Broadway and even the world of big NGOs. He will tell you, I'm sure, that doors will open as you go, often at inconvenient times. So what made Dean Bill particularly effective at EDF was his knowledge base, plus an ability to make science understandable and interesting and even sexy, kind of. He knows this. It's important to talk to civilians. Make sure your message is getting across. Great science that is published in an obscure journal is vanity, not change. Really interesting insights that are wrapped into jargon that will impress peers at conferences instead of the language of real-life examples and the metaphors that make ideas relevant, those aren't insights, those are missed opportunities. Tip 7, passion is almost always worth the risk. You have the knowledge to understand the complexities of today's environmental challenges. You have the real-world acumen to use markets and public-private partnerships, as well as the more traditional governmental tools as well. And you've been trained here to think critically across disciplines. All you have to add is passion, and I know that you have that. Give voice to it. Change the big NGOs. Press government for more than incremental turns of the screw. Be more nimble than the graying institutions. Trust crowd science. Insist that your workplaces be as diverse as America. Passion is what leverages knowledge to create change. It's what's behind Audubon's success in preserving 11 million acres of pristine wilderness in Alaska's National Petroleum Reserve. It drove our efforts to ensure passage of the Restore Act to rebuild the Gulf Coast, the largest conservation funding victory in America's history. And it turned our fight to save the sage-grouse and the grasslands of America's heartland into a national model for alternative energy siting. So I'm going to leave you with a last thought. It comes from my favorite book, East of Eden, by John Steinbeck. It's essentially a passion play, a Cain and Abel story. And the core concept is about choice and about risk. The book turns on the interpretation of an ancient Hebrew word, timshel, Timshel. It translates roughly as, thou mayest, thou mayest. As the book unfolds, the implications of timshel become clear. You will make choices about your life's path. You must. Even if you're not ready, or as I said, when opportunities arrive at inconvenient times. So, choose risk, often enough to stay fresh, often enough to keep change alive in your life, and to keep hope at the center of what you do. You won't regret it. Congratulations to you all.